Değerli konuklar, Uluslararası Açık ve Uzaktan Öğrenme Konferansı'nda açılış törenimiz tamamlanmıştır. Şimdi tüm konuklarımızı fuaye alanına ve sonra öğle yemeğine davet ediyoruz. Öğle yemeği servisi merkez yemekhanede olacaktır. Öğleden sonraki oturumlarımız saat 14'te çağrılı konuşmacımız Profesör Doktor Sayın Nizmar'ın bu salondaki sunumuyla başlayacaktır. Tüm çağrılı konuşmacılarımızın konuşmaları ve paneller bu salonda yapılacaktır. Diğer salonlar için bilgilendirme yapılmıştır. Şimdi konuşmalarını yapmak üzere EADTU Başkanı ve İngiliz Açık Üniversitesi öğretim üyesi Profesör Doktor Sayın Nizmar'ı kürsüye davet ediyorum.
Thank you and good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak here today. I'm conscious that some of you might be listening in translation, so I'll speak. Nobody seems to have headphones on, so maybe you will all understand me. But I'm conscious that there is somebody translating, so I will try and speak a little more slowly than I usually do. I want to talk to you today about the fact that the Open University that I come from is 50 years old this year, and I want to reflect on the future for open universities. And on Tuesday night this week, I was presenting in a webinar in the European Distance E-Learning Network as part of Distance Learning Week in Europe. And that topic was on the future of distance teaching universities. And there were 5 of us, I think, giving presentations. And I was in my office in the UK at the Open University. And I got to the end of my bit of presentation, and the facilitator said, I'd like each of you to say what you think is the big thing that's going to happen in distance teaching universities in the next 10 years. And at that moment, somebody in my office, not realizing that I was still in my room, switched all the lights off. And everything went black, and nobody could see me. And I thought, I really hope that is not symbolic of the future of distance teaching universities. I don't believe it is. I believe there is a future, but what that future might look like remains to be seen. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the Open University UK, which I believe that many of you will know a little bit about. It was established 50 years ago with a specific purpose, which was to open up education to all. It was established as, it was first called the University of the Air because it used broadcast technology, it used television channels to disseminate the learning, the courses, the materials to students. So they'd get a pack of books, and then they'd work through their books, and they'd have to stay up very late at night and watch television in the early hours of the morning to get the content, the supporting content. At that time, that was quite radical an idea. And also radical was the idea that we were giving opportunities to people who had missed out earlier in life for whatever reason. So the 50 years on point for me is a great time to reflect on where we've been and where we are going. John Daniel, some of you may be familiar with his work, said a couple of years ago at one of the EADTU conferences, open universities now don't know how to dress because traditional universities have stolen their clothes. And I think we are seeing very much that traditional universities are adopting many of the things that open universities have been doing so well over a number of years. So the key question for me is, what are open universities for, now that other universities are doing many of the same things? The Open University UK has a very distinct mission. Its mission is to be open to people, to places, to methods, and to ideas. And that mission has not changed over the time that we've been in existence. The places may change, the methods may change, the ideas may change, and the people have changed, but the mission itself still holds good. And one thing that I think is pretty unique about the university in the UK, and I don't know if this holds good elsewhere, is that every member of staff in the university can tell you what the mission is, because they live it and breathe it. It's in the DNA of the organisation. So what we've been doing over this 50 years of opening up education is working in line with our values. Our values are about being open to anyone, anywhere, so that they can study with us. All you need is the desire to learn. So you don't need any entry qualifications, you don't need any special equipment, you don't need any particular training. Anybody who wishes to and has the desire to learn can come and study for an open university degree. And I'm sure that's not unfamiliar to others of you who work or have worked in open universities or are familiar with them. We're also ambitious. We're ambitious for our students. We're inspiring, that's one of the words we use a lot. We're inspiring people to dream, to believe, and to succeed in creating better futures for themselves and for others. And if you talk to our graduates at degree ceremonies, they will all talk about the transformational experience that they've had in being able to access the learning and get the qualification that they sought and take that into further employment, promotion, or even in a different career direction entirely. We've always been innovative. And innovation isn't just about technology, it's often about different ways of doing things. It's about solving problems. It's about turning ideas into solutions so that they can benefit people, they can benefit business, they can benefit society. And we are inclusive, and I'm going to say quite a bit more about that as I work through my presentation. So we celebrate diversity, and we strive for everyone to reach their potential. I'm not saying that we succeed, because there are some barriers to that, to success for many groups of people in society that have been laid down over the years and become almost embedded in the way we do things and our expectations. But we celebrate that, and we aim to overcome those barriers and those hurdles. And again, I'll say a little bit more about some of those things in a moment. Our new Vice-Chancellor, who took up post on the 1st of February, when he gave, 1st of October, when he was giving his first presentation to the senior team, he talked very much about the diversity bonus, about the benefit to organisations of focusing on diversity, both in the student body but also in the staff body as well, and being able to have different perspectives on things. So really taking when you've got a problem, taking the perspective not just of the staff who are trying to solve it, but the students on who it impacts, and the different groups of students within the student body that might be impacted differentially by those problems and those solutions. So our diversity is demonstrated in this slide here. Our students come from across the UK. They come from all 4 nations of the UK. We do have some international students, but it's not our biggest area of activity. But we are 4 nations, so that's England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. A third of students come without the normal entry requirements for higher education. So we have A-level system. Normally you need 2 A-levels at a minimum of 2 A-levels at a certain grade to get into a university. And to get into some universities, you need 3 or 4 A-levels at the very, very highest grades. So it's a very difficult system, challenging system for people who may not have those basic qualifications. 2/3 of our students begin studying aged over 25. That figure's come down in recent years. We are beginning to see younger students starting to study with us. And an increasing number of those are studying at a full-time intensity. So although they're studying at a distance, they're studying online, they're theoretically studying part-time because they have jobs, they have families, they have caring responsibilities, but increasing number of them are trying to study full-time so that they can move through the qualification more quickly. As our colleague said this morning, we also have a very significant number of students with disabilities. We have, I think this figure's slightly out of date. At the last count, it was 29,000 students registering with a disability. And 1 in 12 of those students declare some kind of mental health issue which challenges their ability to study successfully. And that's a growing trend, not just in our university, but in all universities in the UK, and I gather from talking to people at conferences recently that it's also an issue in other countries. We have, as it says here, 7,000 international students studying with us last year, and 1,400 members of the armed forces. And that's interesting because they are not in a fixed place. So the anytime, anywhere absolutely applies to those people who might want to be studying while they're deployed in another country, in a war zone. They might be trying to study in a submarine, any such number of options. We also have quite a number of students who are studying in secure environments, that's in prisons. And that's particularly challenging because students in prison are not allowed access to the internet. So we have to try to find ways around that to support students effectively. But I saw for myself firsthand earlier this year what that actually means, because I went to a degree ceremony and I gave degrees to 3 inmates of a high security prison. And they had their families with them, and including one guy who had his grandchildren with him. And the impact on them, it wasn't just on them getting the degree, it was the impact on the family, the grandchildren that you could clearly see in that ceremony that really made me feel that we were making a difference and changing lives. We have also a very, very active student association, and we work with them very closely to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all our students. And in fact, I've just had yet another email from the president of that association just this second saying, can I talk to you about this? So, of course, I said yes. So that's a little bit about the Open University, and I'm sure you'll be able to see similarities with other open universities in other parts of the world. What I want to move on to now is what the challenges are about being open. And again, I think you will see similarities with all your experiences, whether you're at an open university or a distance teaching university or a traditional campus university. Many of these things impact on us all. So the first thing is around policy, regulation, and finance. So like all universities, and especially open ones, we have challenges in relation to policy and funding. The challenges in regulation, but the challenges in relation to funding and policy are particularly acute when you're working across 4 different nations with devolved governments and devolved responsibilities for education. So I'm sure those of you who are in similar circumstances will recognise that. So in Wales, for example, there is a Welsh Language Act, which says that any student who wishes to communicate with us or to be assessed by us in Welsh has the right to do so. That's an interesting challenge, but it's one that we've signed up to and that we will address. We have different funding bodies for each of those nations, and they all require slightly different things of us in terms of what we deliver. So in terms of diversity, they have different requirements on us. So in Ireland, for example, white Protestant young males is a category that is highly prioritised for both political and equality reasons. In Scotland, there's a big emphasis on people who are leaving care, so they've been in local authority care. They haven't been brought up by a family, they've been in a care system. There's a big emphasis on ensuring that we take those kind of students through the system, and so on and so forth. What has really made a very big difference lately, though, is a new kind of regulation in England, and the Office for Students, which some of you might have heard of, is that regulator. And it has really been established as a very, very hands-off, arm's length body which supports students and holds universities to account. The problem that we have, and that most of you will probably recognise, is that because we're different, so we have different kinds of students, we have a different student body, we have different measures of success, people come to us for different reasons, but the regulator wants to treat us all as if we're exactly the same. So the measures, the things that we do, we seem to have real difficulty in satisfying their requirements. So that's a real challenge for us. And I guess one of the ways that we can mitigate those challenges is to diversify our income and find different ways of supporting the mission through alternative funding sources. In England as well, you might know that in 2012 the system changed to high fees, so there was no longer any direct funding for universities, and that shifted to loans which students had to draw down, and we then had to raise our fees accordingly, which wasn't very good for student satisfaction, I have to say. The second issue, which we all face, and I think it was mentioned this morning, and I've probably seen it in some of the presentation titles that you're going to be looking at over the next few days. Quality is not so much a challenge for us in the UK, because in that respect we are treated the same as other HEIs, so we're subject to exactly the same processes, the same systems, the same reviews and the same requirements. And so an open university degree in the UK has exact parity with any other university degree in the UK. But in some countries, and I think this has been mentioned, in some countries online and distance provision is sometimes perceived as being lower quality or of lower value or of not counting for the same as a face-to-face experience. So we have a big challenge around recognition. And a bizarre example of that, which I came across recently, was to do with one of our partner organisations, which we validate. So some organisations can come to us, we will delegate quality assurance to them, we'll monitor them, and then they can give open university degrees because they don't have their own degree awarding powers. One such organisation is a face-to-face institution, so it's a traditional model institution that teaches face-to-face. A graduate came back to us because they'd been awarded an open university degree from that face-to-face institution, but it wasn't recognised in the country he wanted to work in because the open university was seen as an online institution. So he hadn't studied online, he'd studied face-to-face, but his degree suggested that he might have done, and therefore it wasn't recognised in that jurisdiction. And so I think there's a big issue for us around that acceptance of online learning, distance teaching as valid and as of equal standard to any other type of delivery that we might engage in. The next area, and I think this again is one that you might be familiar with, and this is retention. So we know, as an open university, that we don't quite achieve the same retention rates as some of our face-to-face traditional cousins, if you like, in the sector. And we know there's a number of reasons for that. And it's not just the OU UK. I know that across Europe, other open universities have the same problem, some of them even worse than our experience, I think. In part, it's because the definition of success by the regulators and the policymakers is based in the idea that everybody should be studying for a degree, whereas in many open universities, students are studying for the chunk of learning that they need at the time that they need it. But that's not recognised. But there are compounding issues. So because students are studying at a distance, they can feel isolated. Because they don't have to attend classes, they might not see any tutors, it makes it easier for them to just disappear. And when you're working at scale, and our scale is not as great as Anadolu, I admit, But when you're working at scale, it's quite sometimes challenging to keep track of those students that passively withdraw, that just disappear. To study at a distance and to study online, you need to be self-motivated. You need much more self-reliance to keep connected with what you're doing. And sometimes that's a challenge, especially when life gets in the way and so many things are happening that you think, well, I'll just let the study go because that's the easiest thing to let go. The fact that we're open and that many other universities, open universities, are open in the same way means that students may not be sufficiently or adequately prepared for study at the level that they want to go into. And as a result, they're more likely to drop out or to fail because they don't feel that they are able to keep up with the study. What we've done in the OU UK is to introduce access routes so that we can guide and direct students to appropriate starting points that are right for them. And we've actually produced quite a few badged open courses in learning to study online and other open educational resources that we can direct students to as a result of diagnostics that we built into the inquirer journey, into the registration journey. There's also a lack of sense of belonging somehow. We have in the UK a national student survey. That's a survey that every final year student is expected to complete. And there are 2 questions on that survey which we've not been able to get any change on. And one is, how far do you feel you're part of an academic community? And how far do you feel you're engaged? It's not that our students don't feel they're part of an academic community or they're not engaged. They just don't understand what it means in their context. And so that's a challenge for us, and we score very badly on those questions. And if you don't feel as if you belong somewhere, then it's easier to move away from it, to drop out and to leave. Diversity. I said I would come back to it. I was looking for a nice picture of diversity. There's no reason it's shoes, but I thought the colours were nice. So, but when you operate at scale, how do you provide a personalised experience? How do you ensure that your provision is meeting the needs of every individual student, whatever those needs might be? How do you ensure that your curriculum meets those needs as well, and that the delivery method is appropriate? We know that we can design accessibility in, but how do we assure equity of experience for those who are unable to access online, for example? So I mentioned the people studying in prison. We also have, believe it or not, in parts of the UK, black spots where there is no internet connection, there's no broadband. Even in the UK, it's quite shocking. But that is the case, particularly in rural and coastal areas where there is no face-to-face HE either. So those people who live there are doubly disadvantaged. I think my big issue around the curriculum content is that the idea of the Open University came out of a particular time and culture, and our curriculum developed with that character, which has kind of cast it as of a particular type. And I don't believe that all our students are able to see themselves and their lived experiences in all of the curriculum that we expect them to follow. So we need to do a lot more work around what is culturally and linguistically appropriate. And I had a little debate with a colleague yesterday about language and online learning, and particularly about MOOCs and MOOC platforms. Who decides what's the language of study? There are countries in Africa where there are 500 languages spoken, and yet the choice that learners have is English or French. So I think there's some really interesting questions there, particularly for online providers if you're going global, you're going outside your own country. So diversity is an issue for us. I was going to put a picture of my own grandson on here, but my daughter wouldn't let me. So I've just found this one, but this is kind of symptomatic for me of the challenges that we as universities who've been around for 50 years have, and in relation to the changes in technology that people are now experiencing. So this is not an unusual sight, and we know that children are consuming through screens from very early ages. There's so much technology at their fingertips. There are new developments coming out every day. Learners of the future will be expecting much more than we now provide. I saw some great examples in the presentation this morning of all the things that are happening at Anadolu. Wonderful, but we need to keep innovating and moving forward because young people are already consuming those. And if we're going to prepare ourselves for the students of the future, we need to make sure that we are ready in technical ways. And the other question about young people today, in fact, not just young people, but even people who are already in the workplace, what will those learners go on to do when they've completed their learning? There are no more jobs for life in most places in the world. We're seeing what's called a gig economy, or the Uber society, much more self-employment, much more shifting between occupations, frequently needing to upskill. I was joking yesterday that having bought a new car, I needed to study a micro-credential in order to work out how to operate it because it's got so much technology in it. Frequent upskilling needed. People are having multiple career changes. What do we teach when we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be? So, I'm going to pose some solutions and some opportunities. The challenges I've talked about are not just faced by open universities and distance teaching universities, they're faced by all universities. But what are the advantages that we have as open universities or online teachers which will keep us at the forefront, keep us being radical, unique and disruptive? And I think there are 4 areas that we can build on in that respect. Firstly, the interconnectedness that technology allows us. We are able to use technology flexibly and accessibly. We can connect teachers and learners in multiple ways. We can use multiple platforms. We can use multiple tools. We have some virtual science laboratories and virtual microscopes at the Open University which students can use. So they're not really operating the microscope in Tenerife, but it feels as if they are while they're using it. We can also create virtually mobile communities of learners. So one of the things that is a big disadvantage for men, not a disadvantage, but something that is a challenge for people who have caring responsibilities, who are in full-time employment and trying to study, is that they don't get that parity of opportunity in being able to study abroad. But our technologies allow us to help students to do that, to create virtual mobility schemes in which learners can come together across the globe, potentially to address the challenges that we face both globally, regionally and locally. Imagine if you're a carer or you have a disability and you would really, really like to study in a French university or a German university or a Turkish university. It's not impossible for us to facilitate that. And we can innovate with pedagogy in relation to technology and come up with new ways of learning and new experiences. I'm sure there's going to be papers here around VR and AI in learning over the next few days. I'll be very surprised if there aren't any. Second advantage we have is the flexibility that we're already able to deliver. My challenge to you here is the traditional undergraduate degree still relevant today? Could we or should we create a truly flexible offer for people to study any place, anytime, anywhere, to truly learn through life? I had some examples here, but I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'll jump on. We have students, as I've said before, who are doing their assessments in submarines. I know of a ship's captain who invigilated an exam for a student on board a ship. So we know we have that flexibility. And we have the technology that allows people to study anywhere. So we have OU Anywhere. I think you have Anadolu Anywhere from what I was just seeing this morning. So we know that students can study on the train, study on the way to work, listen to podcasts to learn wherever they are. We have that flexibility, and we've led the way in that flexibility. And so I think we should take it even further. We do have the potential to create virtual communities of learners. And this is something that we've done at the OU. It was one of those ideas that we thought, let's give this a try, but the only way we're going to do it is to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So we didn't ask for permission, we just did it. And then everybody said, oh, it's quite good actually. So what this is, and you can Google Student Hub Live, or it's at studenthub.live.open.ac.uk. It's a live webcasting initiative of events that students participate in via social media. We have a television studio, a set, which is constructed in lots of different ways depending on the theme. I think we must be the only university that's had our Vice-Chancellor, our Rector, all the senior staff of the university sitting on the settee on that television welcoming new students. Don't think you get that at every university. We do all kinds of things like humorous quizzes, so it's the sort of thing, it's like trying to recreate campus life, but in a virtual way and in a way that students can participate in easily. So it's a lot of fun, but there's also a lot of skills development, a lot of learning, a lot of those conversations that take place between students that really help their learning, but don't tend to happen in a distance learning environment because the students aren't meeting in those informal environments as much as they might do. And this project is now very well developed, and it's being extended into Adobe Connect bootcamp sessions, which any student can drop into, and is really creating a vibrant community. My final point is around credentials and recognition. In case you're wondering, the picture on your left is what we call a mortarboard. So it's for putting cement or plaster on. On the other side, you have a traditional mortarboard, or the degree hat. I think we can disrupt the notion of credentials. We should be willing to accredit different types of learning. Learning that's taken place in the workplace, professional learning, any learning that's taken place in an informal or non-formal environment. There must be ways in which we could give credit for those. And that brings me on briefly to the idea of micro-credentials, and I've definitely seen that word referred to in the programme of events a few times. Micro-credentials, we've signed up to the European Common Micro-Credential Framework. They're industry relevant, delivered at the point of need, they're stackable into degree qualifications, and they hopefully will have employer endorsement, but they're small chunks of learning, they carry credit. It's quite challenging to do when your system is predicated on having large chunks of learning as qualifications, but it's something that we are trying to do. It needs willingness to recognise credit from other universities and to trust their quality assurance as well. So I think open universities have got a really important role to play in leading those developments. So we have survived, we've grown, we've developed over 50 years, and I believe we will continue to evolve over the next 50. What we've got to avoid doing is falling into the trap of trying to be more like a traditional university. Let's keep that first mover advantage that we've enjoyed. Let's not try to dress in their clothes. Let's try to get new clothes for ourselves that we know are going to work for learners, whoever and wherever they are. And that's in our hands. So I've heard people say we can't do this because the policymakers won't let us, or regulation won't let us, or we haven't got the money. Sometimes we make the rules ourselves, and we've forgotten that. So we can actually unmake some of those rules. We can change those rules if we want to, and particularly if it's the right thing to do for learners. So I just want to finish with my favourite quote. It's the one that I always use when I'm thinking about the value of education, and particularly higher education. It's from Dame Helena Kennedy. She said, "Education strengthens the ties that bind us, take the fear out of difference, and foster tolerance." Why would we not want to keep doing that? And why would we not want to be at the forefront of universities that are doing that? Thank you. Jerry.
Değerli hocamıza sunumundan dolayı teşekkür ediyoruz. Kendilerine teşekkür plaketlerini takdim etmek istiyoruz. Plaket takdimi için Konferans Başkanı ve Açıköğretim Fakültesi Dekanı Profesör Doktor Sayın Yücel Güney'i sahneye davet ediyorum.
Hocam sahnenin ortasına doğru.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Time for questions or? Okay.
I will take all them.
Pardon?
Yeah, we can take all them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Konferans